As an art medium, video games are uniquely positioned to engage a viewer's empathy when developing a character or narrative scenario. While the viewer might hope that Dr. Grant and the kids can escape the dinosaur-infested Isla Nublar, or a reader might wish Kaladin and the Bridge 4 crew the best as they charge the Parshendi lines time after time, Crichton and Sanderson have had to craft their stories in a way that gives the audience a reason to care about their characters. A large portion of both stories has been dedicated to convincing the audience that these characters aren't entirely prepared for the situations they're in, but they're doing their best. Thousands of words are devoted to this goal, and not once will any character or narrator explain to the audience that this is the intention. In a video game, this could take mere minutes of gameplay, and Pikmin manages to do it without any of the characters saying a single word to each other. For those unaware, Pikmin is a GameCube game that was developed by Nintendo's in-house team and released in 2001. Players inhabit Captain Olimar as he attempts to rebuild his spaceship after he was knocked onto a mysterious planet by an asteroid. The planet's atmosphere contains a highly toxic gas called oxygen. And so, Olimar has to rely on 30 days worth of breathable air before he suffocates and dies. Near Olimar's crash site, the captain encounters an unknown vessel that reacts to his approach. The vessel, which Olimar nicknames an onion, launches a red seed that sprouts rather quickly. Olimar is compelled to pull the sprout, which frees the Pikmin from incubation. The two form a wordless understanding and they get to work sprouting more Pikmin, so Olimar can eventually reattach the parts of his ship that have been scattered across the forest. The forest is populated by a wide variety of creatures that pose a threat to Olimar and the Pikmin, along with a handful of environmental obstacles that the player must figure out a way to overcome. For a game that was originally released at the turn of the millennium and later ported to the Wii, Pikmin occupies a middle ground between early 3D experimentation and the modern practice of making more complex concepts accessible to a broader audience. Olimar has escaped tank controls and simply moves in the direction the stick indicates relative to the camera. That camera is centered behind Olimar with the press of a button, and rotated around him in much the same way as the C buttons did in Super Mario 64. On the GameCube, the Pikmin reticle is controlled with the right stick as a second moving entity, but on the Wii, Nintendo have implemented the pointer controls to immaculate success. What was a somewhat complex control method has been made totally natural with this change in controls, and the experience has been opened to a much larger audience. Pikmin also takes one of the most player skill demanding game genres and simplifies it to the point where anyone can understand and succeed. It isn't going to gateway into Command and Conquer or anything, but Pikmin does allow the player to express the skills they have while not punishing them too harshly if they fail. It would be a fantastic introduction to the concepts of micro and macro games, but with the dated visuals, I can't imagine many people are excited about Pikmin. I did play the Wii version on a Wii U, which is why the image looks so good. The only visual change has been made to the resolution, as the GameCube did not natively support widescreen. This means there are a few muddy textures and stark transitions, but the visual clarity across the game is superb. Enemies are distinct from each other and the environment, and the Pikmin themselves are easily locatable. The character models are generally excellent still, particularly the unique models. The iconic Bulborb forms The iconic Bulborb forms that naturally progress into Bulb Bears and then the big Emperor Bulb Blacks are tremendous and carry just enough detail and character to be recognizable from any distance. The environments are quite safe throughout. While it makes sense that all of the dolphin parts landed in the same forest, the environments being forest exterior, tree cave interior, forest exterior with water, it's a little bland. But with the chilled out music, I can understand that there's an incentive to keep the game's locations comfortable too. Losing all of your friends doesn't need a hellscape to make it more stressful. Controls are intuitive and quite forward-facing even on the GameCube, but in some instances they start to feel very limited. Pikmin is a 3D game and makes regular use of the Y-axis for obstacles and enemies. Throwing Pikmin onto a ledge works well since the reticle can be used, but throwing Pikmin onto a tall enemy is kind of a guessing game. Pikmin attacking a tall enemy also seem to have issues reacting to the recall whistle that can cause losses, but there aren't many instances where that would come up. Red and yellow Pikmin drown in water, so the player must take great care when maneuvering around water with these Pikmin in the crew. This means Olimar can never have his back to the water, since the Pikmin's default gather point is always somewhere behind him. There aren't too many reasons to bring reds and yellows near the water, but whenever the objective involves fire or bombable walls, there is no alternative. Pieces of the dolphin are often found in the open, surrounded by enemies that won't allow Olimar to waddle by freely. There are a few pieces that must be extracted from bosses, and some others that involve very minor platforming puzzles. There are 30 pieces to collect in 30 days. Good luck! The Pikmin are incredibly trustworthy, and Olimar's life really does depend on their collaboration. Assign a group of Pikmin to carry a ship part back to the base, and they'll do everything they can to help out, even putting themselves in danger. If the only way back to base involves crossing a river, the reds and yellows will still try to get the piece back. If too few Pikmin are assigned to carry an object, they'll still try to lift it anyway. They'll fall off ledges, wander through enemy territories, travel over fire geysers, and even take the long way if the player hasn't gotten around to opening the shorter routes. The player should ensure the route back to base is safe, so the part can make it there without too many losses, so there is a minor encouragement to babysit the Pikmin returning items, but if the route is safe, they'll do what they were asked to do. The planet's surface is far too dangerous to spend the night there, so Olimar and the Onions will launch into orbit to wait for morning. This means at the end of every day, Olimar will send all of the Pikmin to bed in their onions to keep them safe overnight. And Pikmin left behind are doomed to a grisly death at the teeth of any nocturnal critters searching for a meal. Combat in Pikmin has a very simplistic approach, but each enemy has to be tackled in different ways in order to effectively deal damage to them and not exhaust the Pikmin population. One strategy is quite obvious when combating the large bulb creatures. Pikmin thrown at the bulb's face will hold on and attack while they can, but when they are inevitably shaken off, they'll be excessively vulnerable to the creature's follow-up attack. Attacks that hit the rear of the bulb are just as effective, and the likelihood of a Pikmin landing within striking distance of the bulb when shaken off is drastically reduced. The frog enemies don't have a specific point of attack. Rather, they leap into the air, and anyone caught beneath them when they land is damaged. Throwing Pikmin at a grounded frog will attach and deal damage like normal. The frog's landing will cause the Pikmin to fall off, and their recovery animation leaves them in danger of being hit by the frog's next attack. This recovery animation can make it feel as though the recall whistle doesn't work. The tall bosses can also invoke the same impression, but aside from the iconic Snagret, the bosses are excellent encounters. The armored cannon beetle is a uniquely Pikmin enemy that is made vulnerable to attack by throwing a Pikmin into its inhale hole. Beady Longlegs is a fight best taken right beneath it, which is also very unique and takes a deal of nerve to go through with. The Puffstool is an encounter that takes the weak point and recall combat method to the extreme. Pikmin can't latch onto the mushroom cap, and if they stick around beneath the Puffstool for too long, they'll be transformed into evil Pikmin that try to attack Olimar. I never even saw the Gulix. Emperor Bulblax is the final escalation of the combat mechanics, and perfectly caps off the game's last challenge before closing out. The Snagret is mainly just uninteresting to fight. It constantly burrows and isn't as engaging as the armored beetle. Plus, it only makes the fun noise when it dies. I was initially surprised by how few locations there are to visit within Pikmin. Aside from the sparsely populated crash site and final trial, there are only 3 wider zones that the player will spend their time navigating. Spending 7 hours in such a limited set of spaces doesn't seem awfully attractive, but the time really just flies by. There are rings of activity that the player can complete at certain times before they have to move on to one of the other areas. Blue Pikmin aren't available until the player locates their onion within the forest navel, so water is a significant barrier and present in every region. There are various door types, some requiring bombs in order to open, which makes finding the yellow onion within the Forest of Hope necessary. These doors aren't visually integrated into the environments very well, but they are mechanically interesting. Leaving Pikmin to complete a task like beating down a door or unrolling a bridge while doing something else is very satisfying. Battling off enemies while a second team breaks through a door is also a lot of fun, and having to manage your crack team of explosive handlers builds a more endearing connection with the yellow Pikmin. The wider zones are visually and mechanically distinct from each other, but they don't take their concepts to any extreme place. The distant spring has a lot of water, but the majority of the pieces in the zone aren't within the water, and the forest navel has a similarly large pool that can make the two seem very functionally similar. But at the end of the day, these are merely nitpicks, as the individual tasks are mainly designed to be completed in combination with each other. Pikmin very simply gives the player a team to lead, filled with reliable members who will always do their best, even if they make mistakes. Then gives the player an objective and lets them loose. The player must assess the task at hand and decide the team they're going to bring, which tasks they're going to achieve and in which order, and micromanage their team in more perilous scenarios. Complete the tasks you can, and forget the items that aren't necessary, all at the player's own pace. If you can play this game, I urge you to. Olimar's current iteration in Smash isn't truly what the Pikmin experience is like, but he is on the roster for a reason. So get your Wii U out, because we all have one. Grab a copy for like 20 bucks, there's loads, and repair the dolphin with your new best friends. Next week I'm playing a dragon game that killed the developer and the publisher.